Setbacks are temporary, but comebacks, they are legendary. Welcome back to the PSI Effect, where we pause, shift, and ignite purpose that speaks louder than your past. This is Neug, and together with Franky, we're your hosts in this space, and your comeback starts now. Welcome back to the PSI Effect podcast. I am here with Franky, and we are glad to have you back with us in this space as we continue our journey and talk about things that are important to keeping us moving on life's journey. So with that said, we're going to jump into things. We're going to talk first to Franky and see what's happening in his world. Franky, what's going on?
I can't complain a bit, Nuge. It's, time is moving by very quickly. Time waits for no one. Time is undefeated. Time is fleeting. So we got to make sure we're making the most of it. It came to my attention very clearly when I realized that my oldest son is about to be 18 years old.
Wow.
And, yeah, man. So I was thinking about that and, getting a little nostalgic, a little sentimental, thinking about like,
Sure.
wow, it really just, feels like we just brought that kid home. And now,
Sure.
he's fine young man, just really enjoying, the person he has become, the person he's going to continue to grow into, and just relishing the time that I still got him here at the house, because I know very soon he's going to be flying the coop off to school, off to work, whatever his future holds for him. So lots of exciting things going on in the Jones household.
Yeah, I'm sure he's pretty excited about reaching that 18-year-old mark.
I don't know. It's interesting because I don't know if that holds the same sort of allure as it did in years past. And what I'm referencing is looking back to when it was time for him to start driving. It's like there wasn't that much excitement for him or his friend group to get their driver's license so they could drive around, which is a stark contrast to how it was for me. Granted, that was a significant amount of years in the past, but that was like the crown jewels. Like, oh yeah, I got my license. I am it now.
Right.
I am that. I am him. Right.
That's right.
I can drive, but they didn't have that same sort of desire for that level of freedom. And I don't know if turning 18 has that same allure like it did back in the day either. So we shall see. Stay tuned.
Awesome. Well, that kind of hits with a lot of what we talked about in previous episodes, talking about, the whole growth and, falling out of your comfort zone. And, quite naturally, I guess at 18 is somewhat a natural flow to step out of your comfort zone, because now you have that freedom to do some other things that you didn't have or that you weren't able to do before. So that's kind of cool. That is exciting.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see, how he steps out of his comfort zone. Because one of the things that, my wife and I always find to be a very delicate balancing act is making home comfortable, but also making sure there's plenty of motivation to get out on your own. Because, the last thing I want is there to be some sort of failure to launch situation where things are just so awesome and so comfortable at home that I don't want to do anything else but be at home. I think that would...
Right.
That would not be the outcome that we're looking for. You got to step out on some, taking some risk.
Absolutely. Well, that just, that's a good segue. Today we're talking about comfort and comfortability. And so that just moves us right into what our conversation is going to be for today. And so I just want to start by asking something. We all say that we want to grow, we want to change, we want more fulfillment. We also love comfort at the same time. And, comfort isn't in and of itself a bad word, but it is, it can become something that we never meant to happen, right? We just fall into that comfort area. So, what do you think is kind of the main comfort areas that people kind of fall into and just kind of lay in that cut and just don't want to move?
Well, I don't think we're intrinsically comfortable. I think to a certain extent we strive and we reach for certain things or we have certain desires, but then once we've achieved those things, we're like, okay, I've got this victory. I've achieved this victory. And that victory becomes a bit of an anchor, whether it's I got this degree, or I've got this job, or I'm married and I have a kid and I have a home. Those may be check box or checklist type of items that we have. And it's great to have those. But once we check that list off, sometimes we get stuck in needing to move on to the next thing or to continue reaching for something new. And there was a quote I came across. It's like, a man's reach should be greater than his grasp, which kind of suggests we should always be reaching for things beyond what we have and where we are. And that's not to say that we should be unappreciative of what we have and where we are, but we should always strive for growth. And falling into the comfort zone, while the comfort zone does have some pluses, getting stuck there definitely causes problems in achieving future goals.
Perfectly put. And that's kind of what we're talking about today is that area of comfort. And I mean, you can go in and out of that comfort zone, right? As life changes. And so, I just wanted to briefly hit on something that I think many of us learned years ago, which is the Maslow hierarchy of needs, where Maslow talks about, uh, you know, uh, the basic needs of an individual um, uh, to feel like they belong,
Uh-huh.
right? And he talks about psychological needs. He talks about safety needs, love and belonging, esteem, so self esteem and self actualization. And so I think the basic area of which Maslow talks about in his hierarchy, where I think comfort is really key, or where comfort really comes into play, is in those psychological needs. Because those psychological needs, the safety needs, primarily because psychological needs are basic: air, food, water, shelter, right? Those kinds of things.
Uh-huh.
And then safety is personal safety, employment, and health and property and so forth. And so I think, sometimes once we aspire, or uh, once we reach those levels of satisfaction, that we can become complacent and get comfortable in that space. And so then moving on to love and belonging, esteem, and self actualization can be somewhat challenging for us sometimes. What do you think about that, sir?
I, I think it's spot on. I mean, you think about the things that we need to survive. Um, for survival is like the very baseline. We buy at a very minimum, we want to make sure that we can survive. And then there's this next level up of starting to thrive. And I think those hierarchy of needs kind of stack well to go from survival to a level of thriving. And in that, we're talking about getting comfortable. I think that's one of the differences between surviving and thriving, is that there's a level of comfort in there as you're getting by when transitioning between those levels.
So I think that the surviving piece of that is where we are somewhat comfortable, because we have our homes, we have food, we have clothing, and we may have a job, and those kinds of things. And so that is in to me in that thriving piece, um, in our growth, right? And I don't think that Maslow was talking about um, uh, I think what he was doing was explaining why people move once life feels good, right? Moving to the next step, moving to the next level of, that ambition, or that thriving for the next level of growth. I think that's part of what he was talking about in that whole hierarchy process.
So that's interesting. So if getting comfortable, the way you describe it, it sounds like getting comfortable is like the catalyst for the movement. So I guess what makes being in the comfort zone a bad thing then?
Well, in and of itself, I don't think that being in that space is a bad thing. But I think what happens is that, we get really comfortable with where we are because things are going really well. We aren't having what we perceive to be any big challenges in our life. Um, home life is going well, work life is going well. We're making enough money to where we can provide for ourselves or our families if we have that. And so, that piece isn't bad. It's not bad, right? Um, but moving out of that space to the next level of growth, I think can sometimes uh, hold us back because of fear, because of self-esteem, because of any number of things. And so, in and of itself, being in the comfort area is not a bad thing.
So it's getting stuck there. That's the problem. Is that what we're getting at?
Yeah, I think the part is definitely being stuck because you get so comfortable and so complacent. It's like you're not really thinking about, or your level of motivation to get to the next level may be low because things are working so well where you are.
Understood. So I think it's important for us to, with our listeners, to make sure we drive home the fact that, we're not saying that being comfortable is a bad thing, that you shouldn't be comfortable. I don't think that's not the message we're trying to convey here. What we're trying to say then is we don't want risk aversion and, fear to cripple us from stepping outside of the comfort zone. It's okay to be comfortable as long as we don't allow it to become a prison for us.
Yeah, because when you're comfortable, your sense of urgency is pretty low, right? Because things are going really well, right? And things feel stable, right? I'm okay. Things are going all right, right? So, uh, that urgency level is low and the risk level is low because things
Mhm.
are going so well. And it's when it's time to uh move to the next level, or when something comes along that you want to reach for or achieve, then now you got to step out of that current comfort zone
Uh-huh.
and reach for, the next rung on the ladder, so to speak.
Interesting. So it almost seems like, we're, I'll speak for myself here. When I get to a place where I'm comfortable, I tend to kind of hang out there until there's something inside of me that's like, hey, we need to move on to the next thing. We need to go to the next, like you said, the next rung on the ladder. And it's I don't know what that thing inside of me is. It's like, yeah, I've had victories, but maybe I'm not fulfilled anymore. Maybe it's that difference between victory and feeling fulfilled. But I tend to hang out there until it's time to start pressing forward to the next thing. But in that sense, it almost seems like a comfort zone is a good spot for us to kind of catch our breath after a big effort. I think we've alluded to it in previous episodes too, the importance of having a safe space that you can kind of retreat to, for lack of a better term, to catch your breath and kind of reorient before you jump back out into the fray.
Yeah, and I think that comfort area is kind of our pause phase
Mm.
in our pause, shift, and ignite. I think the comfort is the pause phase because things are going well, and you can, as you say, you can kind of relax in that space for a minute until something fires you up to move forward. And that thing that you talk about that may rise up in you to move to the next level or to do something different, to fall out of that comfort zone, that's one way. It's something that could rise up in you in that way. But in other areas, it could be something that forces you out of your comfort zone. Life circumstance
Mhm.
can force you out of that comfort zone and force you to that next level, which actually would be the shifting phase, right? To give you some idea, or to, to keep along that analogy. Um, and so then you shift into that next stage to achieve the next the next step, the next level, whatever that is.
So it sounds like that pause, though, before we dig into that shift, that pause is where we're going to really have to lean in and be honest with ourselves, because it definitely sounds like we could run into a scenario where we use our comfort to rationalize being stagnant instead of moving forward.
Absolutely. I think that's 100% spot on because, like I said, at least I believe that when you're in that comfort zone, when you're in that comfort area, things are going well and you don't want to do anything beyond that because things are going so well for you right now. So yeah, I think that identifying it as a stagnant phase is can be an appropriate analogy.
And it seems like it'll be subtle too, because I just thinking some of the times where I've, huddled in my comfort zone instead of moving forward. It's like, oh, well, this seems like the best course of action, looking at all the things that are going on right now. This seems to be uh, the least amount of risk involved in this. And it's not something that just, you're going to see some glaring klaxon that tells you, oh, nope, you're making a bad decision. You're making a bad decision. Staying in the comfort zone may seem quite reasonable, but we have to be able to see past that during the pause.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think I look at comfort too as kind of a state of being where you are, right? And that's why I say you can move in and out of comfort at different times of your life, just depending on what life circumstances deals you.
So once we spent that time kind of reflecting on where we are, assessing where we want to be in that pause, we get ready to shift. And I think one of the important pieces as we get ready to shift is understanding that there's a difference between comfort and stability. What are your thoughts on the difference between those two things, Nuge?
Well, I kind of think that they go hand in hand because when you're when you feel comfortable, I think you are in a stable position in that point in your life. So I think they work hand in hand, or they can work hand in hand. Because when you think about it, when things in your life are chaotic and you don't feel stable or you don't have stability, you're not real comfortable no matter what's going on. Right. You may be okay with this or you may be okay with that, but I don't think that you're feeling real comfortable when you don't have a degree of stability in your life.
Yeah, I like how you put it in a previous conversation that we had. You mentioned something about, comfort being, not or avoiding tension, and stability being the ability to handle that tension when things do go off the rails. And I think that's, the way you expressed that was a really good way for me to kind of frame the difference between those two. Yeah. Comfort is we don't want tension and we want everything smooth, no ripples in the pond. But if we have stability, that empowers us to be able to deal with those times when we're not comfortable. And it sounds like that stability is the requirement for when we want to grow, not necessarily comfort.
Yeah, I agree. I think that is exactly right. So because if you don't, I think if you don't feel stable, then you don't have the. I don't know that you have the wherewithal to step out there and grow. I think that may instill more fear of staying where you are if you don't have something stable to work from,
Mm.
or you're not coming from a place of stability.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So I'm trying to think of some examples like that I've come across in the past. And I think most recently I've talked about my employment situation and moving on from my job that I'd been at it for a long time. And I think one of the things that kind of stayed my hand for not trying to leave sooner is that I didn't feel like I had stability. I didn't have all my ducks in a row. I didn't have, my resume wasn't updated. I wasn't in the LinkedIn space. I didn't feel stable enough to kind of jump out there and start looking for something new. I didn't feel like I had that foundation up underneath me, and that kind of held me in place, for lack of a better description. So yeah, I definitely identify with what you're laying down there.
And that what you just spoke of could very well be your perception of the situation. Others around you may have
Uh,
very well thought, you know what, yeah, Frankie can go and he can do this and he can do that or whatever.
for sure.
But that personal perception was like, oh, I'm not ready for that. And I've had
Yeah.
that happen as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting the things that'll hold us in place. But much sometimes unbeknownst to us, things that hold us in place. Our worry about what other people will say if we make these changes or take these risks, and more importantly, what we think about ourselves. But that's another thing that can kind of hold us captive in our comfort zones.
Absolutely. So now when we talk about, making the shift, so, we're in this comfort zone. And so people have come to know us a certain way, right? They know that we're
Mm,
reliable, they know that we're consistent, they know that we're dependable. And um changing that can bring fear upon us, right? Moving out of that,
mhm.
fear of that relationship change, fear of approval from others, right? So moving out of that comfort zone has some personal risk of our perception of ourselves. Um, and so I think that it's something that you have to, like you were talking about, something moves inside you or something rose up in you that you had to move to the next level.
Mhm.
I think it's something that you just have to want to do, something that gives you that push to move forward. Otherwise, you can remain stuck if you don't have any motivation, any desire, or any why to move on to the next thing. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the fear of failure either. It could just be the fear of losing the perspective of how people feel about you, or losing the perspective of yourself. What do you think about that?
I mean, those are huge. I mean, the whole perception of self is one of the biggest motivating factors that we have in human behavioral science, right? So the things that we think about ourselves and the lens through which we perceive the world uh, frame how we act in that space. So yeah, anything that's going to impact our perception of our identity is going to have a lot of gravity when it comes to dictating how we behave and our choices to take on risk.
Yeah, and that shift is risk, right? And even in the financial world and investing, they want to know what your risk level is, right?
Your risk
Um,
tolerance.
your risk tolerance, right?
Hmm.
And so, moving out of that comfort zone, is a personal inventory or personal assessment of how much risk are you willing to take on.
Yeah, staying with that analogy, when you say you have a higher tolerance for risk in the financial space, if you're investing, what does that mean for us, Nuge? What is the result
Well,
that we usually see?
well, in that environment, from what I've learned is that sometimes you take on uh, financial positions that are riskier, that they move quicker, that they're more volatile, right? Uh, than others. So um, you are not afraid of the losses quite naturally,
Hmm.
um, because if you're in a higher risk position, then your potential for loss is actually greater.
Right. And most times, too, while that potential for loss may be greater, the potential gains are also greater. And
That's
that's
true.
why, quick financial tip from the PSI Effect podcast, when you're younger, it's better, like if you have a 401k, to have that in a higher risk type of investment because, you've got much more time before, you need to retire and start drawing on that. And that's what the financial advisors will tell you because you're able to take advantage of those bigger bets. Yes, there's more risk, but there's also a greater chance for reward. And I think that analogy holds true for us when we're talking about our comfort zones and our ability to take on risk. We have to decide how much risk are we willing to take to try to move forward? Because guess what? We're not going to move forward without taking risk. If we just stay in the comfort zone, we're staying the same. When we want to lean into that stability, that means that we can still grow, we can change things and take risk, but that stability keeps us from just tearing everything down that we've built.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I just want to say to the audience that, we're not financial counselors. These are things that we have learned through time. So I just want to put that out there. I don't want anybody to think that, we're trying to give them financial advice, because we're not. But when you do speak to financial counselors, as Frankie alluded, those are some of the kinds of things that they will tell you. So
Yeah,
I
read the
just
fine
want
print.
I just wanted to make sure uh, that we put that out there. And so, yeah, so you're talking about stability lets you grow without blowing everything up, right? And so, when you talk about the investments, if you have a stable financial position, you're not as worried about, some of those losses, those potential losses. And the same thing in your personal life. If your personal life is stable, then you're not as concerned about some of those challenges that may come in the future. How do we move out of this comforting state? And as I mentioned before, I think that the state of comfort, you can move in and out of that state over time, depending on what's happening in your life. But let's say that there's something that really needs to take place in your life. You need to move out of that area of comfort where you've been, right? And nobody here, we talked about this too, nobody needs to, burn their life down. Nobody needs to tear everything apart, right? We don't need to do that. But maybe there's still something, one thing that you've been avoiding because it feels uncomfortable, right? What would you say about that, Frankie?
Quote I came across from Ray Davis while we were getting prepared for this episode, and it says, "Comfort zone is a beautiful place, but nothing ever grows there." And that tells me, I mean, that speaks to what we're talking about here, where, yes, a comfort zone should be a transient state for us. So, we should be moving in and out of that. But when we feel like we're stuck there, when we feel like we can't get out of that comfort zone, guess what? Growth can't happen while we're stuck in that space. And I think one of the things that kind of contributes to that is that sometimes we confuse comfort and the comfort zone for happiness. I think there are times where we can be quite comfortable and still be unhappy because there's more that we could be reaching for, but we're stuck in that comfort zone. And for whatever reason, we can't seem to get ourselves out of it.
That's interesting. Relating comfort to happiness. And I agree with you because I think oftentimes we have this feeling, or we can have these feelings that, we're going to be happy when, right?
Right.
We're going to be happy when this happens or when that happens, or if this person does this or does that or what have you. And I think we get caught up into that and forget that our happiness, at least in my opinion, our happiness comes from within, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our happiness comes from us as individuals. No one is responsible for your happiness but you. And so to tie that to comfort then tells me there's some other things going on. There might be some other conversations that need to happen with some people who are actually trained to talk about these things with folks. But happiness starts on the inside, right? If you can't be
Mm-hmm.
happy on the inside, then you just can't. I just don't believe that you're going to see happiness on the outside. And you really don't see happiness, I don't think. I think the happiness is what you have, or happiness is as you perceive it to be in yourself. And so the other part that I think sometimes we tie comfort to is being lazy.
Mm.
And I don't think that being comfortable means that you're lazy. I mean, sure, things may not be, maybe they don't move as fast, what have you, but I don't think it's being lazy. You can be a very organized and very hardworking individual, but still be come in that comfortable zone because that could be part of the comfort, right? Because you are so organized, because you do work hard, you have a good work ethic, and things are going so well, you're in a comfortable area. So, being lazy and being comfortable also can be confusing. So I just wanted to throw that out there as well. What do you think about that, Frankie?
Yeah, I mean, it's in the eye of the beholder. The thing, all the things that we've talked about up to this point are all in the eye of the beholder. What it means to feel comfortable. What's the definition of happiness? We've talked about in previous episodes. How do you measure success? That's why the pause is so important as we're, trying to get ourselves moving along this. If we're stuck in a comfort zone, the pause is so important because it's during the pause that we'll get the answers to those questions. So what those things mean to us individually as we're trying to get out of the quagmire if we're stuck in the comfort zone. But like you said earlier in the conversation, to get moving in our we've paused, we've kind of shifted our mindset and we want to start moving. We don't necessarily have to burn down the whole thing. Just like you mentioned, we talk about this quite a bit to the point where, sometimes I feel like a broken record saying we can break it down into smaller pieces. We can iterate our way forward and break this objective down into small chunks. Just try one small thing. It could be a ton of different things. It could be a conversation that you're avoiding having with somebody at work or with somebody, in your life, a loved one, someone in a relationship. It could be, a bad habit. We spent a lot of time in the past couple episodes talking about habits. It could be a bad habit or a habit that's not working for you, that you need to alter or get rid of, or a new habit that you want to start. Um, it could be learning how to say no, because sometimes just being able to say no to something is difficult. It could be saying yes, because sometimes
Mm.
saying yes is equally as difficult, especially if you think there is risk involved. So I think it all goes back to that personal perspective of how risk averse do you want to be? And for there to be growth and for there to be progress, there has to be some level of risk. There is no growth without risk. There is no progress without risk, because change is a destructive process. And there has to be, what's the old saying? If you want to make an omelet, you got to break some eggs. And that's the way we got to approach it.
And you said a lot there. And you first started talking about, some things that we may be avoiding that keep us, just keep us from stepping out of our comfort zone, maybe
Mm.
conversations. And, we can have a whole episode on difficult conversations, because I think that that is something that many of us, if we aren't experiencing right now, that we've experienced in the past, where we are uncomfortable having a certain type of conversation with someone that can move us forward, improve a situation, um, make communication easier, um, some of those kinds of things. And so we could probably have a whole episode on that
Hmm.
conversation and difficult conversations. So we'll make note of that, that we can circle back on that. Um, And then, just the whole piece about saying no and maybe saying yes. I mean, I think that that also plays into the communication and conversation piece that we just mentioned just now, because I think that's really important. I think people do find it difficult sometimes to say no, and equally find it difficult to say yes. And I think sometimes we get ourselves into situations when we can't say no,
Mm.
that, we don't necessarily want to be in, which in turn, I think adds to that whole discomfort of moving into a different space or to a different state.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I just want to drive home the fact is that you can't hit a home run if you don't swing the bat. So if we want to attain a new goal, if we want to change our current state, we're going to have to embrace a little bit of discomfort. We talked about that in the episode we had last year with Kyle, talking about embracing discomfort. If we want to be able to make a change, at some point, we're going to have to be a little uncomfortable. We're going to have to peek our head out of our comfort zones, be able to start making progress there. And I think there's a challenge there. I think there's a challenge for us to, issue to our audience in this particular case, for them to, go out and try to be intentional about embracing one of the uncomfortable things that's been on their mind for however long. What's something that you can do this week on purpose that helps you to step out of your comfort zone?
I think that's a good challenge. And I want to encourage folks too, Frankie, because you mentioned it earlier about, when something just kind of wells up in you that makes you want to do something different. That could be the signal, or that could be the sign that you're looking for about uh, a move to the next state, right? A move to the next level. So yeah, absolutely. What is one uncomfortable thing that you could do on purpose? And now, especially at the beginning of the year, we're talking about resolutions and we're talking about change, and we're talking about those types of things,
Uh-huh.
this could be a very important time for you to take that inventory and make those kinds of decisions.
Absolutely. I mean, there's no time like the present to start trying to work on the new you, the new situation, the new whatever it is that you're searching for. You're not going to get there by just sitting back and doing nothing. It's going to require some action. It's going to, for any of us trying to achieve our goals, we're going to have to embrace a little bit of discomfort. Like I said, peek our head out from behind our fortress of comfort and try to take some small steps towards our new goal.
And give us that last quote again about comfort and growing. Nothing.
Oh, yeah, that was it was a quote from Ray Davis, and it says, "A comfort zone is a beautiful place, but nothing ever grows there."
Perfect. I think that really sums up a lot of what we talked about today. And hopefully, our audience, have gained something from what we've been talking about. And as we mentioned before, what we talk about here in the space are things that Frankie and I have experienced in our life. And, we try to articulate some of that here to kind of help you move forward in your journey. So we really appreciate you being here and sharing with us. And Frankie, if you don't mind, sir, will you tell our audience where to find us?
Absolutely. If listening to the PSI Effect podcast helps you to feel comfortable, that's a good thing. Remember that. I want you to make sure, being comfortable listening to this podcast is okay. And hopefully it helps you to step out and do those things that are uncomfortable that you need to achieve your goal. But you can find us anywhere podcasts are distributed, Amazon Music, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all of the usual suspects. You can go for anything PSI related, go to our website. This is psipod.com. You can see a list of all our episodes and all the different places where it's available. You can find us on social media at thisispsipod.com, as well as on YouTube. So find us, like, subscribe, but most importantly, comment. Let us know what's going on with you. We love interacting with the folks that are listening to the podcast, and yeah, we love to hear from you.
Perfect, perfect. And I just want to reiterate what Frankie said. Please make the comments. We do read them. We look forward to them. So don't be afraid to drop us a note. And so with that, we've come to the end of this episode, and we really appreciate you being here. So we thank you for being here with us. And until next time, just remember that setbacks are temporary. Comebacks are definitely legendary. Until next time, go out there, be brave, and rise on purpose. Thank you all for being here.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the PSI Effect podcast. This show doesn't happen without you, and you can connect with us via Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. Visit our website at thisispsipod.com and find us on YouTube and social media at This Is PSI Pod. That's at This Is PSI Pod. Until next time, remember, be brave and rise on purpose.